We're following a major update in the mystery of an American tourist who went missing in the Caribbean nation of Turks and Caicos. Police in the Caribbean say they found not just one, but two bodies in Turks and Caicos over the weekend as they searched for Brian Tarrence. I'll tell you what we know about those bodies, whether they're connected to the case of Brian Tarrence, and what we know about Brian Tarrence beyond the fact that he went missing, vanishing, walking off into the night while his wife slept. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. If you've been following the story of the missing American tourist, Brian Tarrence, who walked away in the middle of the night out of his Airbnb that he was staying in with his wife on their anniversary trip, this story may have taken a very sad and dark turn. First, I want to show you a picture of 51-year-old Brian Tarrence. He works as a vice president for a software company in Manhattan, and he lives in the New York suburb of Monroe. That's in Orange County. I'll talk about the two bodies that police found as they have been searching for Brian Tarrence in just a moment, but let me get you caught up on what we know at this point about his disappearance and the very bizarre circumstances that surround it. On June 25th, police say he arrived in Turks and Caicos with his wife. They were there to celebrate their one-year wedding anniversary. Terrence and his wife booked through Airbnb, and they stayed at a resort called the Paradise Inn. And you can see where it's located on this map. And it's in a pretty popular area where there are a lot of resorts, and very nice resorts in Turks and Caicos. The area of Turks and Caicos where they were staying is called Grace Bay. Very popular. Again, a lot of resorts, and there's a lot of shops. It's a place where tourists can often walk around. Now, there have been some safety concerns in Turks and Caicos. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But according to police on the islands, 3 days after Terrence and his wife arrived in Turks and Caicos, he vanished. He left his Airbnb in the middle of the night as his wife was sleeping. It was around 3:30 in the morning that Terrence left his Airbnb, and you can take a look at this screen grab from surveillance video that shows Terrence just walking down the street. This was provided to media outlets like Fox 4 in Dallas, reportedly by a private investigator that Brian Tarrence's family hired. Now, that PI also tells Fox News that Brian had his phone with him and his wallet, but he did not have his passport. And at the time of this recording, he has not been seen since.
The Royal Turks and Caicos Islands Police Force has carried out daily systematic search operations in the surrounding areas. These efforts have included ground patrols, drone surveillance, and a detailed review of CCTV footage. We have also received valuable support from our local tourism partners, concerned citizens, and international agencies, and also visitors. We thank them all for their ongoing assistance.
That is the statement that police in Turks and Caicos put out. Now, they've been leading this search, looking for Brian Tarrence, and over the weekend, they made not just one, but two shocking discoveries. Before we get back to this episode of On the Case, I want to pause and bring you a Law&Crime legal alert, because if you received a Depo-Provera birth control shot and were later diagnosed with a brain or a spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. Our partners at Morgan & Morgan are investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It is free to check, takes just a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So you can scan the QR code on your screen or click the link below. Also, head over to www.forthepeople.com/LCDEPO to see if you qualify. Here's a post by the Royal Turks and Caicos Islands Police Force saying that they found a male body in the area of Grace Bay. Again, that very nice tourist area where Brian Tarrence was staying. And it was about a 20-minute walk from his Airbnb where this body was found, apparently in a ditch surrounded by brush. Now, that body was found around 9 in the morning on July 5th. And according to police, the body was in a state of decomposition. Remember, it had been several days in very, very hot weather since Brian Tarrence disappeared. At the time of this recording, though, police have not identified the body, and I want to be very clear that there is no confirmation that it is Brian Tarrence. The cause of death for that body has not been determined, but police have said to this point they're not suspecting foul play in his disappearance. Now, there was another body that was found in Turks and Caicos, about a 20-minute drive from Grace Bay on July 5th, and this one found in bushes. Police have not identified the victim, but they say that is a suspected homicide. And again, that was found about a 20-minute drive from Grace Bay. Very well could not be connected to this search, but neither of these bodies have been identified. There have been a lot of questions about where Tarrence went. And his brother spoke to a newspaper in Turks and Caicos called The Sun and provided some information about what Tarrence's mental state may have been at the time that he disappeared. Mike Tarrence told the newspaper, quote, "This is very personal, but come to find out through all of this, it was discovered he is a very bad alcoholic. We were also told that with either the drinking, lack of sleep, or both, he was experiencing hallucinations." Now, Brian's brother also said that his brother was very smart and he has never gone missing and has never been in a situation like this. Now, Turks and Caicos, it's a very popular vacation destination for Americans. It is a quick, direct flight from major airports like in places like New York or Atlanta. So it's very easy to get to, but there have been some concerns in recent years about rising crime, particularly homicides on the islands. But I think it's important to note some context with that when talking about Brian Tarrence, because according to the country's tourism site, it's really the remote areas of the islands that have seen those safety risks for tourists, which is not the area that Tarrence was in and where the investigation and search for him has been taking place. Now, the site also specifically says walking alone late at night is not recommended, but says that is for the areas outside of Grace Bay, which is the area that we have been talking about. Joining us now to talk about this case is missing persons private investigator Steve Fisher. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us to talk about this one. Very bizarre circumstances surrounding Brian Tarrence's disappearance. At this point, what does your gut tell you about what's happening here?
Well, so a body's been found, obviously, and they haven't made a positive ID on it, but it doesn't appear that there's active searches going on. So they may have enough reason to believe that, they're waiting on an ID. They don't need those searches right now. But it's hard to say. We might not be getting all the, information because the news coverage may be different or whatnot.
Right. And then there was this other body that had been found in Turks and Caicos, but it doesn't appear that that's connected to this. That is a murder case, but doesn't seem to be connected to the Brian Tarrence search. Going back to when he disappeared, 3:30 in the morning. From what we've been told, it was a vacation he was on 3 days in. Seemed like everything was going fine. An anniversary trip with his wife. What stands out to you with how this story started? And if you were on this case, where are you going? I guess if we go back several days ago to when he was first missing.
Yeah, so obviously it's a scary one for the family, right? You're out of the country and don't know the area. They did hire a private investigator there that's former NYPD who lives there now, and I think that was a smart thing to do. Somebody that probably has connections to local law enforcement. But him leaving at 3:30 in the morning, they've alluded. The family through their investigator has said that he was experiencing some sort of issues, and he was off, I think was the quote that his wife said. And I know she had mentioned that she got up twice during the night to check on him, and she said he was watching TV. So I think there was something going on, and we don't know exactly what that is. And then him leaving is concerning at 3:30 in the morning, no matter where it is, no matter if it's in the U.S. or on vacation on an island. So, but it as far as the search goes, that makes it, that it throws a lot of variables into it.
And Turks and Caicos isn't a large country. The area where he is, Grace Bay, is still seemed, even though there's some concerns about the country, a relatively safe part of Turks and Caicos. You have been on searches. You do it all the time professionally. I think for us on the outside, we see the video of people maybe looking through some brush. We see the drones being put up into the sky. But how do you actually go about taking a large area and trying to find a person? And we don't know if it was his body that was found, but even in the case of finding a body, how do you take that on?
Well, you start at their last known position. So in this case, they have the surveillance footage that they've shared a still image of him walking away at 3:30 in the morning. Now, the private investigator did allude that he said they have other footage that has not been released yet. And that area, he walks by the Ritz-Carlton and other hotels. So there's going to be a lot of surveillance. But when you lose him on surveillance, from there is where you start your search grids, and those are going to be based on decision point analysis. He's walking down this road, and what's the next intersection he could go left or right or straight at, and you have to try and get in that mindset of that person and what you think they might be doing or trying to accomplish, and then you have to draw out search grids from there. We do have software programs that are take all the past searches over history, and you can kind of model these things out, like how far linear from a road or whatever a person might be found. And but in an island, it does become a lot more complicated because of the water, and and although we don't know if this is his body or not, that's a concern if it's not, because we've seen this with the female on spring break in Dominican Republic. So it becomes a huge concern, and it's even though it's a relatively small island, there's still very tricky searches, because you got a lot of overgrown brush and tropical type of environment.
Yeah, and looking at from what the private investigator has told some media outlets and has said is that his phone was missing, presumably meaning he took that with him when he left, and his wallet as well. One thing that stood out to me, because it took roughly 10 days to find this body, and again, we don't know if that's him. I'll just keep saying that, but um, I would, in so many cases in the US where when someone has their phone, I mean, that often leads you right to where they are. What does that tell you, that it took a long time and that this search is still technically ongoing when his phone wasn't at home?
Yeah, it does make you wonder if the phone was powered off, or but intentionally, or if it just ran out of battery or something, because they should have been able, obviously, he in that part of the island, you're going to have, it's a big tourist destination, you're going to have cell towers in the area, so they should have had a good idea. It shouldn't have taken that long. So it makes me think that something, either the phone was dropped somewhere, taken, or powered off intentionally, or just ran out of battery. It's about a 20-minute walk, they said. So that is concerning, but who knows in that state of mind. Really what it comes down to is, those searchers and those investigators really need, I'm sure that they've gotten as much information as they possibly could from the wife of exactly what his mindset was, because from there is how you plan the search, whether it's despondent or whatever it may be, whether it's mental health issues. People will act differently, and they might be able, he probably had a better idea what his intentions were, what he might have been out there seeking. Was he just out there getting clearing his head? Did he feel cooped up in the hotel room? Whatever it may be. And I'm sure that there's a lot more information that the wife was able to provide that we don't know about.
Yeah, I mean,
you know.
because I think about the statement from his brother to the local newspaper in Turks and Caicos, The Sun, saying that they had found out that he did have what they referred to as a bad drinking problem. He was an alcoholic, and then he was also seeing some hallucinations, which when you read that, and we see that in a lot of missing, and I'm sure you do as well, in missing persons cases, some of the mental health challenges that people face and how that can lead to a disappearance. When you're dealing with that type of case, and in this case, you recognize that he may not have been in a good state of mind at the time he disappeared. How do you balance that with the other thing that his brother said, which was he's never done something like this before, and it's very out of character for him to just disappear like this?
Yeah, and so in the vast majority of these cases, mental health or substance abuse is, I mean, it's a prevailing thing. 85% of the cases that work on. And the issue that we have, especially at the beginning, is usually those people close to the person don't want to really give up that information. They feel that it's putting them in a negative light, and they feel that if they find out that this might be a result of mental illness or alcohol or drugs, that the search will get scaled back and that law enforcement won't take it seriously. They'll just write it off, when that's really not the case, and that's information that has to come forward right away, because we change our search patterns based on that. And so, and although the brother said that he's never done this before, he may have done it, he just hasn't gone missing as a result of it, so they don't know about it. This could be something that he does. It could be a pattern. We see it a lot in schizophrenia. People will leave where they're at. They usually leave anything that's trackable, like cell phones and stuff, behind. So it's probably not that, but there's these patterns. The family just might not know. The brother might not know about it. It could have been an issue that was going on, because the private investigator did say that the wife had gotten up twice during the night. She went to bed fairly early and checked on him. So if she's doing that, there had to be some reason.
And then when it comes to this body that may or may not be Brian Tarrence, but it was hot. It was roughly 10 days since he disappeared when the body was found. So it was, it's a morbid part of the conversation. It's a badly decomposed body. Yeah. What is the process of figuring out who that person is?
Well, so they'll, depending on what state it was, even badly decomposed, they possibly could have gotten fingerprints. I'm guessing, since they don't know by now, that they probably weren't able to. But if he's ever been fingerprinted in the past, then he would be in the FBI database. Otherwise, they go to DNA, so they'll get a DNA from a family member, the brother, the parents, whoever. That does take a little bit longer. And, listen, although maybe our labs have been made available to them through the FBI, we don't know I don't know what the process is for Turks normally, or how long that can take. It can take a little while. Now, I'm sure that they have some sort of idea based on whoever this person is by what they were wearing and whatnot. Right. They know it's a male, so it's not completely decomposed. So there's probably a little better idea, but they just want to be certain before they say anything. But again, the private investigator did say something to the fact of, even though the body had, sneakers, shorts, and watch that matched up, we can't say for sure. But I think he's kind of, which, as investigators will do a lot if we see, if we want to kind of get the message out there without being, 100% matter of fact, I think he's telling us there's a likelihood that it could be him. But I don't know how long the process could take if it's DNA.
Right. And yeah, you would think, we've seen, and they have videos, surveillance video of him. They know what he was wearing the night that he disappeared. And then that has probably not decomposed to the extent that the body has, and you can match that up. If this is Brian Tarrence and the search for him is now over, and he was found in what was described as a ditch in some brush area of Turks and Caicos and Grace Bay. What happens as far as figuring out exactly how it got to this point, even if it's not a case, and they've said to this point throughout the investigation, there's no sign of foul play. But even with that, what can be done in a foreign country to just figure out what happened to him?
So, the FBI does have an attaché office that covers Turks and Caicos. It's based out of Nassau, Bahamas, and the consulate that covers Turks is also in Nassau. But so they can make themselves available to local authorities. They do have to be requested in, but if there's any suspicion of that, I'm sure the FBI will make themselves available if need be. I think again. I don't think there's any reason to doubt Turks and Caicos law enforcement. I think that they'll be thorough on this, especially since it's been a high-profile case, and it is a tourist destination, so they don't want to sweep it under the rug, certainly, and they want to look like, or they want to do a thorough job. I think, from the autopsy, we'll be able to tell a lot. Was this person that was found off the side of a road in a ditch, hit by a car, and the person didn't stop, because that would be homicide. And there's been some rumblings of possibly this is being treated as a homicide. That doesn't mean that it's an intention, that's different than a robbery or, intentional killing. So I think the autopsy, which again, unfortunately can take a while because they're not going to release that autopsy until they also have the toxicology back. That just takes a little while. But that will tell a lot, whether this is, blunt force trauma, whether there's any, gunshot stabbings, stab wounds, anything like that. So we'll tell a lot more, and that will really dictate if there needs to be further investigation, I think. And plus, what was found at the scene, was there parts of vehicle headlights? Was there, that's information we don't know yet, if there's any broken glass or the other information, and that will kind of dictate what happens, and the constable, I think, will be on top of this as well. I unfortunately, beyond just with regular cases, my younger brother was found deceased in Mexico, and so we had to deal with the consulate's office, and they were very thorough about the investigation, death investigation, and everything.
I'm sorry to hear that. Because I just think of his family throughout this and his poor wife, who that you go on this 1 year wedding anniversary trip, and he's having some sort of challenges, but you're there to celebrate, and then all of this takes place. I mean, for you, and especially now knowing that you've had a personal experience, in some ways similar to what the Tarrence family's going through. As a missing persons private investigator, and they've hired one, I mean, how do you communicate that really difficult news to this family that, I'm sure if it is him and the clothes were there and you're telling the family this information, I mean, that part of your job, how do you go about that?
Yeah, so I've unfortunately been in that position many times. On searches, we found people in a state of decomposition where it's going to take the medical examiner a while to make a determination, but ultimately we know that it's that person. They're wearing what they're supposed to be wearing. They're in an area that we thought they might be in, and you just have to. I don't know. I don't know what everybody's process is. I'm just very straightforward with them. I'll just separate them, get them alone, direct family alone, and just tell them exactly, what we found under what conditions, and that we can't be certain. But I wouldn't be telling them that information if I didn't think there was a real possibility. And it's very hard to do, and especially when being out of the country, it's got to be such a difficult decision to board an airplane and leave the country and go back to the United States without knowing 100% or not, and I really feel for her and the whole family.
Yeah, and hopefully, for better for worse, they can get some answers and at least some closure in that. We'll continue to stay on top of this story. Steve Fisher, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.